For 3.5 years, James Waterhouse was the BBC's face of the Ukraine war.
I think it's the alarm clock that plenty of Ukrainians hoped wouldn't come.
No longer the what if, because the what is now happening.
In Ukraine, it was 12 hours of this.
James arrived in Kyiv before the full Russian invasion as a stringer, expecting to file the odd report, mainly for the World Service. He ended up in our sitting rooms, often leading the 10 o'clock news night after night for well over 1,000 days. Now home, he came into Times' HQ to talk about his extraordinary Ukraine stint with us. James was fascinating, not least on how he saw warfare dramatically change, and he was also searingly honest about how it changed him. Welcome to The General and the Journalist. I'm Tom.
And I'm Patrick.
James, thank you so much for joining Patrick and I. And
Pleasure.
welcome back, I should say.
Thank you. Yeah, it's as a former colleague used to put it, we have the gift of departure, don't we? And actually, I'm able to leave Ukraine, and it's been nice to sort of dip my toe in a bit of normality, balance, and reflect on the ongoing story as the rest of Europe tries to work out what to do.
Like the rest of us.
Quite.
So you first went to Ukraine January 2022, before the full-scale invasion. How on earth did you end up there?
So I had always wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and as you can appreciate, so do a lot of other people. Ukraine came up in the end of 2021, and the bosses felt, look, it's been the same story for a while in Ukraine, a war of 8 years. We need to blood some new people. Waterhouse, they said, you've got 3 months, and then there are going to be some people after you.
You're on the taxi rank in London, doing the usual job with the BBC newsroom.
That's it, on the grind, on the news treadmill, trying to get a foothold, trying to get that long-wanted specialism. And then on the 17th of January, I landed in a 2-hour flight for a journey that now takes 2 days.
Of course, you landed straight in Kyiv, didn't you?
Straight in Kyiv, on the Ukrainian airline.
And it was a backwater then, wasn't it? It was obviously, there was a story there, the Russian invasion of the Donbass in 2014, but it really wasn't on the news much.
It wasn't. And I mean, to be fair to my bosses, they sort of retrospectively acknowledged they could have been a bit more bright-eyed to the situation, because by November 21, there were 150,000 Russian troops.
I mean, this is where I really struggle with this, because we were watching the intelligence build up. So I was clearly in the MOD at the time, and we were watching the intelligence build up from August onwards. We'd had Putin's ranty essay published, which made absolutely clear what his intentions were, and he's kind of done what he said in the past. And it's not like there wasn't public debate across Europe around the build-up of forces. I mean, the only thing that no one knew was, and we didn't have intelligence on, is whether Putin would actually pull the trigger or not. But the force build-up was extraordinary. So to send someone who wasn't a specialist in war zones or on defense into Ukraine a few weeks before the invasion looks to me like it was just a peculiar decision. I mean, quite unfair on you.
Well, I mean, it's not as binary as that. I mean, by 2021, I've been a senior reporter for a best part of 10 years, and I was very experienced in the field. But it's the age-old editorial dilemma. You're not going to send someone to a war zone without war zone experience. But how do you get the war zone experience? So it was one of those extraordinary moments where it came to you, and
I mean, boy, did it.
You sink or swim, yeah.
And the BBC, in fairness, and James, didn't have the sort of access to the intelligence that you had access to, Patrick, and actually neither the Times either.
Yeah, and in fairness, the Ukrainians themselves were in denial. I mean, not the military, because they took a series of moves that I'm sure you're aware of to make sure that they were able to withstand the initial onslaught, particularly dispersion of some of their forces. But I think in the minds of Zelensky and Yermak and the head of the government, I think they were in denial until the very last minute. So yeah.
Rugby, however, was your first love. It was also your first profession.
That's a brilliant gear
Not journalism. Did you see
That's
what I did
the
there?
best transition I think
was
I've
like
ever
one
heard.
show.
It was totally smooth, wasn't it? You see how I did this, plucked it out of the air. Anyway, you were a professional rugby player for 5 years before you even thought of journalism.
Again, a technicality. Look, I got to put this in context. I wanted to play rugby at the top. I played in the championship, which is second tier, the old national one actually when I first started. And to my great regret, it's not like football. If I played at the same level in football,
You've been playing for Portsmouth or Blackburn.
yeah,
big club.
exactly, yeah. And I wouldn't be in a sort of a 10-year-old M&S blazer. But yeah, I signed for Rotherham when I was at University of Sheffield. Loved it. And it's a young man's game, isn't it? I just wanted to throw everything in. I loved the social, probably a bit too much. I loved traveling the country, going to different places, Doncaster, Plymouth, Cornish Pirates away in Camborne, and then Penzance. I mean, proper character building, formative stuff.
But it was during your rugby career that you took some advice from someone quite interesting. Who was the guy who put you down the road to journalism?
Yeah, John Inverdale. He's he's in my mind a complete icon of broadcast journalism. And I just remember, journalism, I don't think, you probably disagree with me, Tom, but I don't think it's something you decide at 18 in the main that you want to do. You have to generate life experience and then curiosity. But I sort of said to John, I like what you do. And he's just said to me, look, if you're interested, do a postgraduate course in broadcast journalism and then freelance in local radio. That's what I did.
So you switched, you decided to take up journalism, but being a war reporter per se, knee deep in mud with ammunition flying over your head, that was never really a long-term ambition.
No. You're just looking to get a foothold, aren't you, in a hugely competitive industry. But my first job at BBC Essex, if you're looking for, my first contract, if you're looking for a news patch, Essex, you do well to do better than Essex. You've got extraordinary trials, domestic violence, some of the most notorious murderers getting whole life tariffs. It's a political cauldron.
Yeah.
So I made a lot of mistakes and got a lot of experience early on.
So I'm fascinated by your experience and Tom's experience. And Tom did an interview with Ant Lloyd a few months back, who's a great old friend of mine. And I found it the most interesting episode that we've done in this podcast series because it's the mechanics, the artistry, the process of journalism on the front line. And of course, we have, we spend, so as soldiers and journalists, we spend a lot of time in the same places. We share the sort of general hazards, but we're often in tension. Because our objectives are sometimes different. And some of the time, you take far more risk. You're not paid to put yourself in a position where you're under fire, but like we are, but we have a wrap. There's a sort of security blanket around us. We know that if we get hurt, we'll get evacuated. All of that structure that goes with the military is what we enjoy on operations, whereas you're completely on your own sometimes. So what I want to get into is what it feels like to be a war reporter, how you go about it, how do you judge risk, how do you follow a lead? But before we do that, you spent, 3 years in Ukraine?
3.5.
Yeah, so it was meant to be a 3-month gig. And then you find yourself in Ukraine for 3.5 years, 3.5 of the worst years. Just talk me through your daily life, your daily existence in Kyiv and how you went about things.
There are so many phases to it. We did, I think the best way to tackle it is chronologically. So you had the 6 weeks of this geopolitical crisis where I was just swallowed by the story. And
that's the 6 weeks leading up to
the
24th of February.
Yeah. And when you talk about, you nod to those markers, like the gathering of troops, the Putin essay, and then it kind of, at the time I probably should have been more sensitive to, that the Kremlin, that extraordinary Security Council meeting, recognizing the independence of these so-called breakaway regions. A very glum-looking Jake Sullivan at the White House saying he's going to do it. There was a feeling of inevitability in the end, but then the moment war breaks out, it is the flicking of the most dramatic of switches this shadow that just descends on everything. Fear, anger. It's unlike anything you don't even get close to a comparative experience. And that's before you even thinking about your own welfare or, the task at hand. But then to kind of condense it, you have this hugely kinetic moment of approaching Russian forces, swirling unknowns, conflicting analysis.
And they were very close in
They're
those
very
first few weeks. I mean, they had the airborne landing at Hostomel, just outside Kyiv.
Yeah. And if they'd taken that airbase, then it would have been very different. But I remember grimacing. I'd be asked on the radio or on TV, or I have to write about it, about this 40-mile long convoy, all the satellite imagery showing these Russians coming in and then moving into firing positions not far from where we were. And I remember feeling quite irritated, being asked something. I just want to say, I don't know. Can you just, I don't know. Who knows?
Where are the Russians?
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me look out the window.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see some gunfire 2 miles away.
Exactly.
Let's just go back to that first night though, shall we? The early hours of the morning of the 24th of February 2022, that's when the Russian tanks crossed the border.
Yeah.
Where were you at the time, and how do you remember hearing about what was happening?
I was fast asleep. I was just shattered by that point. And then I got a phone call from my cameraman saying, "Get your shit together. It's happening." And there were explosions. And this was the first war that I'd seen where you had the events in real time happening, but you also had telegram feeds, social media awash with pictures elsewhere, columns moving south from Belarus from these apparent exercises that were announced the week before. I mean, that was another marker. Moving over from Crimea, there were soldiers across the road from me, Ukrainian soldiers, burning documents, and all day they were just coming out and burning documents. And I thought, what do you know that I don't?
Thinking that the capital could well be overrun.
The capital could be overrun. And then Zelensky tweeted, I mean, imagine this from a president. Anyone who wants a weapon will get one. And so people turned up with their passports and were given AK-47s, and off they went, and they manned checkpoints. And all of a sudden, when you walk out, there were checkpoints every 100 meters. So you couldn't move. And actually, one of the most dangerous parts were those checkpoints, because you had poorly trained soldiers, nervous, angry, frightened, cocking their rifles at the slightest bit of suspicion. And there was Kyiv's main station had cars piled up on top of each other, where the council had tried to move. I mean, people had just driven to the station, got out, run, headed west. The fear was palpable, inescapable.
Were you scared?
Yeah, massively. I mean, my coping mechanism was to I couldn't think more than an hour ahead.
How did you overcome the fear?
I don't know. I think I didn't. I sort of tried to. I tried to sort of limit my own expectations and just try to just work at the task at hand. So I focused on work.
Yeah.
But I sort of relied on my gut a bit. I thought, actually, I signed up for this, and I've got a huge interest in it. And actually, you can't report on Ukraine, which recent history has been on the receiving end of Russian aggression, and not tell the story of the culmination of that. So that was a kind of gut judgment, and then then you start to normalize. But the first week is even now hard to kind of sort of describe in a clear way.
The normalization point is really interesting, because this has been my experience. You can get used to anything.
Yeah.
And so things that you find unbelievably shocking or destabilizing initially become routine.
Yeah.
Being under fire, being under artillery fire, you get used to it.
Human beings are unbelievably adaptable.
Yeah.
So my equivalent was my first war was the invasion of Iraq. I was embedded with a Royal Marine Commando unit, and we're in the Kuwaiti Desert, and then suddenly the air raid warning started going off. It was 3 beeps of a siren or 3 bangs of a pan, which is a sign for incoming. And it was the first time I ever heard that or ever been under incoming fight. It turns out Saddam Hussein had launched Scud missiles from Iraq at Kuwait somewhere. I never heard the missiles go over. They landed somewhere in some shopping centre in Kuwait and killed a parked car with no one in it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I was utterly petrified. I was so convinced
Yeah.
that I was going to die. Completely needlessly. I was in my shell script, my respirator on, which we were told to put on, my NBC stuff, and I was just totally convinced that, oh, you idiot. What have you done? You've come here to try and prove yourself as some, young buck, and now you're going to get killed in the desert.
But it's the uncertainty. It's the
Yeah,
fear
it's
of
what
the
you don't know.
fear of the unknown is much worse than the actual experience itself.
That's it.
So I found myself in Basra Palace, caught out in the open with mortar and rockets landing around us, and I had one land about a foot away from my head.
Wow.
And all that you hear is laughter. Because the blokes around you, everyone's taking cover.
Nervous laughter.
And well, yes, I mean, definitely nervous. Yeah, and it was a daily experience.
Normalization is as helpful as it is dangerous.
I mean, impossible question to answer in a succinct way. But what were the highs?
There are many to choose from. I think what I'm most proud of is we had an extraordinary 2 weeks in an extraordinary week in Kherson, really, in the autumn of 2022. And the story had been Russian advances, then Russia's retreat of Kyiv, revealing the horrors that have been committed. And then all of a sudden, on an inconspicuous autumn day, Ukraine managed to liberate the southern city of Kherson. And all of a sudden, you're driving in a Toyota Hilux, full whack, behind a load of tanks moving in, into a city where there are Russian banners on, where there are shops stocked with Russian stock from occupied territories or Russia itself. There are people jubilant in the street, and then Zelensky makes a surprise gathering in the square of Kherson. And there are moments where I remember just kind of just slapping myself. Like, you'll never feel like you're in a moment of history until enough time has passed. But those moments will forever stay with me. And Zelensky said, this city will be the first of many. Sadly, it has not been so, but his country is still standing.
But you identified with the Ukrainian cause. I mean, part of that must have been celebrating Ukrainian success.
Absolutely.
Witnessing a liberation, what an amazing thing to be able to say you've done in your career anywhere. But as a journalist, James, so you went out there as a stringer, hoping to file for the World Service if you're lucky. So you're on the 6 o'clock news, you're on the 10 o'clock news, and you were leading these. You were the very top item. Were you sort of conscious that you were really beginning to excel in your career, to talk about it slightly selfishly for a moment?
Yeah, I think, and that realization didn't come until, I remember in the first few days, you'd have the Clive Myries would arrive, Fergal Keynes would be there, Paul Adams, all these people, and Nick Robinson was there.
Probably a good idea or a good indication that there might be a war coming.
Yeah, exactly.
With all these big names coming out to Bigfoot you.
Yeah, exactly. And Bigfooting is a correspondent's nightmare where, in the journalistic food chain, you'll be there telling your story, and then someone bigger and more experienced than you will just tap you on the shoulder and say,
now.
I'll take that. I'll take it from here. Well, I mean,
you're going to be the Bigfooter.
I've yet to do it, but I've already been practicing the kind of patronizing shoulder tap.
I see. That's how it is.
But eventually there's a tipping point, and then you absorb it. You actually know what you're talking about. And then people start to ask you, you then start guiding programs. And then now being out for a few months, the weight of it behind me, there is no substitute for experience. And my boss said, she thinks I've had about a decade of experience in 3.5 years.
But there must be a cost to it too. I mean, what about the lows?
Oh, I mean, I have lived with an extraordinary amount of stress for most of those 3.5 years. 2022 and 2023, I undoubtedly had post-traumatic stress. The BBC did a couple of screenings on me, and I had an interview with an external nurse. And the view was you are coping with an extraordinary amount of stress. You have quite a high threshold for that. When you do those male health checks, and you start clicking on the screen, and they work out. And so apparently, I've got a high threshold for it, but it's not cost free. I mean, there are blurs, and the best way to sum it up is when you're in this cauldron of pressure, I remember being there thinking, I can't wait to go back, see my friends. There was a work leaving due, and I just wanted to go, go to Ibiza for a weekend, for example. I'm not a big raver, but there are these kind of feelings. And then when you get out, I was just a fish out of water. I just couldn't enjoy anything. It was sort of like living through a perspex screen. So the first 2 years were an extraordinary strain for me personally, and those I love.
Was there a moment where you could put your finger on feeling that dislocation?
Getting out in April for the first time, so that was 13 weeks with not one day off. I remember going on a trip to Paris just to try and unwind, and all I wanted to do was just sit with a beer all day, and I couldn't. It was like a restlessness. That's about as conscious as I was of it at the time. I just knew there were pictures of me posing for photos with people, and my eyes are just sort of. I look exhausted.
This is from 2022, mid 2022 onwards. So
yeah,
I mean, understandably,
yeah,
it wasn't something that occurred to you 10 years later. You were living through this while you were also on the job.
I was, but it takes people that know you well to point it out. And I had a conversation as recently as last week where people said, I was worried about you. I was really worried about you. And I remember...
you push it away, don't you?
You kind of push it away, but I wasn't saying it out loud in my head, I'm in trouble. But there were just moments where you'd stand in Tesco Metro, what meal do you want to get? And I was like, I don't have a view. I don't know. I remember being on a holiday, we'd missed a boat. And I remember just feeling so much anger because everyone else was, understandably annoyed to have missed this boat. And I almost wanted to say that it just doesn't matter, and you lose, you can't deny relativity. We all have a right to, and so maybe there was that would happen a lot, and a fluctuating mood, and I would, fly off my handle, which those know me, I never used to do.
I mean, my experience is it's a profoundly selfish situation because for me, war zones are like heroin. It's like having a sustained 6-month or 12-month heroin high. The sort of the acute awareness of your own mortality. Everything is brighter, sharper, more clearly defined. There's a clarity about what matters in life, and everything else is trivial. You've got the luxury of not having to worry about bills, tax, shopping, missing a boat. And when you get home and you're confronted by this, it still feels trivial. I had a moment in 2007. Just got back from what was a very, very violent tour in Basra, which caused me all kinds of mental health issues for a while afterwards. And
PTSD, were you diagnosed, or how deep did they go? No,
I mean, because unlike James, I don't think I sort of put my hand up and went through a review. I just wasn't myself. But the point for me where, I came sort of close to breaking was going Christmas shopping with the family. Just got back, found myself on Oxford Street, going into Selfridges, and the sheer level of materialism. The notion of going Christmas shopping when I had just buried so many people, where people were being killed, and I couldn't cope. And I started shaking, and I had to walk off. I tucked myself in a pub on my own, told the family to go off, and I sat there in a pub and drank through the afternoon and sort of took myself away. So for me, it's the price you pay for the high.
Yeah.
Is the low when you get back, and you sound like you found a way of coping and adjusting.
I did, but I made a lot of mistakes, and I think the theme you'll hear is alcohol. I think like my relationship with alcohol changed definitely, and there were definitely times when I was self-medicating.
To what extent?
Well, I mean, I wasn't binging, but I would just look forward to having a beer, or I would just, alcohol would be weaved into every social event, and it just became, it just made things easier. And then, you know, a few difficult conversations happened where you have to get over the defensiveness. You know, okay, actually, maybe I am, you know, and then out there, in these environments, out there, alcohol, you know, is around. And in a war zone, you don't have outlets. You can't go play a game of tennis. You can't go for people who are your friends, not colleagues, just friends who will talk about other stuff.
You can't leave the office.
You can't leave the office, indoors or outdoors. So you take away these outlets, which would otherwise alleviate stress, and all you're kind of left with is alcohol, you know. And we had a really oppressive curfew, which kind of added to it, and people were just letting off steam.
There was an incident, wasn't there, in June 2023? You reported on a liberated village, Neskucha.
Yeah.
You then, 4 days later, you'd used some leave, you came home and you went to a wedding in Devon, which you really struggled with.
Yeah, I did. Neskucha was the start of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And the risk assessment had all these, you know, the BBC was the first in there, so you have that kind of extra pressure. And the risk assessment read something like, you know, there's still Russians around, there could be helicopter assaults, sniper fire, mortar fire, shelling, in you go. And we knew it was a huge story. We had something interesting to say, and we could mitigate what we could, and you know, you sort of get your head around it. You go in, and it was just rubble. You have a physical reaction to it. You prepare to it. You then normalize. You come out. You make your peace. Have this huge high, and then you have a. In that case, it was a 3-day journey home from eastern Ukraine, back to the UK, back to a wedding in Dartmouth, and all I wanted to do was just sort of. You sit with my partner by the sea. I didn't want to do any kind of socializing, and I found it enormously difficult.
The military have got quite a good system now, don't they, Patrick? If you come from your operational tour and you've spent 6 months in Helmand or Basra, you don't go straight home. You go to decompression, or you spend a week in Cyprus or more potentially, and you talk it out, you have a drink, and then you go back into society at your homes, etc.
You're right. We do go through a process. We did anyway when we were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, through a process called decompression. It helped a bit, you know. So we'd fly back through and spend. It was 48 hours in Cyprus, which basically consisted of a bunch of lectures about how to look after yourself, be careful about drinking, driving, you know, a few reminders, and then a mammoth piss up. Absolutely mammoth piss up with everybody.
But that's the important bit.
That was important, but it's not enough. You know, you can't decompress in 48 hours, and it's very telling when you look at the Falklands as an example. You know, the units that came back from the Falklands by ship had much fewer issues than those who were flown back or got back faster. It takes quite a long time to come down.
Yeah,
and you can only do it, and this is what I found. It's I guess it's different for you because as a journalist you're not part of an organization or a team in the way that we are. I mean, yes, team is important, but for me, I was surrounded by, you know, in my case, 1,200 people in the battle group who'd all shared the same experiences as me, and that was a family that you could talk to, who understood, who had experienced the same highs and lows that you had. Whereas an individual, you know, I'm not sure you've got that wrap around you.
Well, in the nature of foreign news is that we're never in the same place at the same time. So you'll see an old colleague have that shared wink.
And these experiences are so specific that you can only really talk about them with people who were actually there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think with me, over the 3.5 years, you would do, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, 8 weeks on, 2-3 weeks off. You're running at a deficit, because without fail, it would take a week to start to feel normal, where you wouldn't walk down the street and feel troubled or unsettled. And then you go back and go straight into it, and then you'd actually feel, you'd be comforted by the familiarity of Ukraine and the war zone, and you know, that deficit doesn't go away.
Yeah,
I remember coming back from Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. I was my longest. I did repeated embeds, but that was my longest in almost 3 months with 40 Commando. And then I flew home. I was delighted to come home. nice big fat stay in the Hilton Hotel in Kuwait City where all the Marines are still mucking in Basra. But after about a week or so, I just felt incredibly depressed. I had a real black dog, not clinical depression, nowhere near the sort of really difficult times I think either of you two have been through, but just really down. And I desperately missed these blokes.
Yeah.
And then they came back and they said, we're back and we're going to have a reunion. Do you want to come? And I was so happy to be part of that sort of fraternity. It was sort of pathetic, really. And I kept saying, so hang on, you're a journalist. You're not in the military. Get a grip of yourself. But it was that craving for that sort of company and the esprit de corps and the people who've shared that moment with you. It's really, really, really hard to find.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very kind of you, Patrick, to compare journalists with, we will say that we take more risks. I mean, for those of us with a big network, we've got people and an operation around us. You know, sadly, with journalists, it's freelancers who get into trouble, or print hacks, who it's sort of them and a fixer.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
And poor judgment.
Yeah, I mean, it's and that's what they're the moments when you're there and you're thinking, do we want to go around there? Hang on, what are we here for? Do we need to go around there? And you have to really anchor yourself where possible. Like, what are we here for?
You've been very honest and forthright in talking about this sort of stuff, James, and we're grateful. And it's not easy to talk about, and I suspect it's not easy for Patrick to talk about it either, but it is important.
Absolutely,
so good on you. Can I ask you, your reflections, really, looking back, you've left Ukraine now, 3.5 years. What's changed from when you arrived to when you left, especially in terms of warfare? What's so different now?
I mean, the story, I think, is lost in maps somewhat. Russia's broadly occupied a fifth of Ukraine since 2022. But the story now is one of not a front line. It is an enormous swathe of territory around sort of 10 kilometers, according to the Ukrainian military, in some areas where you have, I mean, Anthony Lloyd wrote about this, you know, you've got pockets of petrified soldiers who have to trek out to get to their positions because it's now too dangerous to go in an armoured vehicle, and drones rule the skies. So you're in smaller collections of fighters. The Russians are using smaller units, still in a wave kind of tactic, where they go on mopeds, or sometimes they'll use armoured columns, but less so now. And it is nothing short of a hellscape.
This is largely because of drones.
Absolutely. Right? You know, if you were to go there from 30 kilometers out, you're at risk with getting hit by a drone. Russia is slowly eroding territory. It's hard to see whether there'll be a meaningful collapse of the Ukrainian front line, but that is the story of it. And for Ukraine now, it's no longer about winning. It's just about holding on and not having its position further weakened for an eventual negotiation.
Why have drones changed the ability of war reporting so much?
We're talking about first-person view drones, FPV drones. You're going to hear a lot about them. Many will have seen them used recreationally. As the political debate has stalled and stuttered over what Ukraine can be provided with from its Western allies, Ukraine looked inward and has accelerated drone warfare. Russia has done the same, where these drones can be packed with explosives and flown into targets in a kamikaze fashion. They can be rigged to drop grenades on troops below. And unlike artillery fire, gunfire, glide bombs, once they see you, you will do well to survive it. And they've created this inertia, whether you're a soldier or a vehicle, they will stop you. So punching through in a meaningful way is simply too difficult now, with both sides depleted as they are and reliant on just trying to mobilise to fill the gaps.
And in terms of trying to report on that, just last Thursday, 2 prominent Ukrainian journalists were killed by a Russian drone. The well-known war correspondent Elena Hubanova and her cameraman Yevhen Kamazin. They died when a Russian Lancet drone slammed right into their car, the front of their car, near Kramatorsk in the Donbass. Absolutely heartbreaking pictures in the Times today and other newspapers of their funeral, a joint funeral in a cathedral in Kyiv together on Monday. And they were 12 miles behind the front line when they were killed.
This is the reality now. I've got a colleague whose husband was killed. He was in a mortar unit south of Zaporizhia, and he would often text her saying, "Look, this is just awful." They were just waiting for it because you can just hear drones swarming, and he was hit, and they take death head on. They have these open caskets. You could see his facial injuries. I knew David well, and it is drones that are the biggest, most effective killer.
Yeah. How is because of course one of the reasons that the Ukrainians were so quick to pivot to drones was because of the relative imbalance of manpower, and they're covering up to 600 mile front line. They haven't got the manpower to cover all of that, so you plug the gaps with drones. But that has meant, as you've said, as the front lines have gone static, as you've got this deadlock, you end up with these very, very isolated pockets of soldiers who, because they literally have to almost belly crawl 20 kilometers over 3 days to get into these positions, they can't be rotated. So normally speaking, think about the First World War, people would spend time in the front line, in the trenches, for about 2 weeks at a time. Whereas for these Ukrainian soldiers, they can be there for months, in some cases, years at a time. But how have you found morale? I guess at two levels. How have you found morale amongst the soldiers that you've spoken to? And then for the cities, as they approach winter, as the Russians will engage with their targeting of power stations, power generation, and pretty indiscriminate, some of it as well. How is civilian morale?
Low. It's really difficult. And the reason being is, as you say, this is the fourth winter now where infrastructure is going to be targeted, where water, comms, light is cut off. People haven't had a solid night's sleep for coming up to 4 years. People have lost colleagues, loved ones. You only have to scratch a little bit beneath the surface. With the soldiers, I mean, as you say, the conditions now, they have a look. You can tell when a soldier's been on the front line. They have this almost sort of shadow, this darkness around their eyes. And there are some guys, as you say, who are spending that long on the front line, and you privately think you are never going to have a normal life. I cannot see how you are going to recover from this, and that's if you survive. And of course, we're at the stage of the war where those who volunteered did so long ago, and are either exhausted, dead or injured, and you now have men petrified of being mobilized, which risks dividing society. It already is, and pulling the rug from any kind of war effort. But as you know, this is what wars do.
So morale is low for all the reasons you describe, but that doesn't necessarily equate to their will to resist being low. How long do you think that will to resist can be sustained? Because, I mean, the thing that worries me, worries the Ukrainians, is about manpower. That they need to mobilize more manpower to fill the gaps, and they're struggling to do it.
Yeah, I think the soldiers I speak to, it ranges from we can do this for another year, maybe two. But that means sustaining the losses they are. They equally believe that Russia isn't capable of punching through. The Russian offensive for this year has ground down. The soil is soft. The rains have arrived. It'll soon snow. And they haven't taken a major town or city. They've destroyed them, but they still haven't technically taken them. So I think that fuels a kind of a faint bit of optimism. But, US aid has just been dwindling. The Trump administration hasn't signed off any more aid directly. There are big question marks over Europe's ability to buy it, which has been publicly talked about. So I think, in a war of attrition, it's about who loses first. And Ukraine will lose first unless the collective West, including America, oversees a ceasefire agreement and maintains enough pressure for that agreement to hold. Otherwise, it's a hypothetical. But at the end of those 2 years, for example, you might not have anyone left to fight in theory, but you would imagine that there would be some kind of political intervention before then.
So, James, back to your story. Why did you want to come home?
Because I think to be effective at this job, you need to have a multifaceted life. I've got a very patient fiance who's let me do this. She's been there with me from the start. And for it's about recognizing that this environment comes at a cost. But I do want to utilize the experience I've gained in telling similar stories in the future. But I think it's time for a fresh perspective, someone to take the story on, to battle that status quo. And for me, I've enjoyed covering the diplomatic efforts or lack of across Europe. I've been following Zelensky with meeting NATO and European leaders and Donald Trump. And it's been good to anchor myself in what I've seen and felt in those stories. But I didn't want to emerge, so to speak, with nothing. And it doesn't matter, how significant or good for your career a story is. You've got to keep a grasp on the bigger picture.
Can I ask you a slightly difficult question? And I don't mean it's any bad way at all, because I really think you have done your time there, more than enough time. Did you feel guilty about leaving?
Oh, massively. Yeah, you leave with a very heavy heart. And I think like my friend and colleague Anna losing her husband a few weeks ago really hit hard, because actually I was in a hotel room in Brussels, covering the politics there. And then all of a sudden, of course, David's been holed up in a foxhole for the best part of a year. And he leaves behind an 8-month son. They're these jarring moments that pull you straight back. So it's good that I feel guilty.
I mean, for what it's worth, coming from me, I guess I want to thank you for what you've done for the last 3.5 years, because Ukraine matters. And it doesn't just matter on a human level. There isn't just a moral imperative to support the Ukrainians against Putin's onslaught. There's a strategic imperative. And I think by illuminating that, as you've done so well, you've given the Ukrainians a chance of what I would describe as victory. And victory isn't necessarily regaining all of the Donbass or Crimea, but victory where Ukraine is sovereign and independent and able to defend itself with security guarantees is a Ukrainian victory and a Russian defeat. And I still think that's achievable. But as you say, we need to make sure that we arm them, give them the means to do so.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I mean, that's all we can do, right? We've just got to go see it, got to go feel it, smell it, and tell folks about it.
James, thanks so much for sharing everything with us today. You've been really honest, quite brave, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, James.
Well, that is it for today. As always, please do send us your questions and thoughts to our email address, generalandjournalist@thetimes.co.uk, generalandjournalist@thetimes.co.uk. We read them all, and they are all incredibly helpful. So until next week, bye, Patrick.
Bye, Tom.